She thought no one would ever hear her story. But now you have. Subscribe to give voice to others like her. My name is Maria Santos. I'm 42 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. I never imagined that taking a job as a live-in maid would expose me to the darkest secrets of wealth and power. Everyone sees the mansion, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, and thinks these people have everything. But I witness what money can't buy and what it can destroy. The Whitmore family hired me 3 months ago through an exclusive agency that serves only the ultra-wealthy. The interview process was more intense than applying for a government job. Background checks, psychological evaluations, even a lie detector test. They made it clear that discretion wasn't just expected, it was mandatory. I signed papers that basically said if I ever spoke about what I saw in their home, they could destroy my life financially and legally. From the outside, they seemed perfect. Richard Whitmore, a tech millionaire worth over $50 million, his elegant wife, Catherine, and their 3 beautiful children, Emma, 12, Jacob, 10, and little Sophie, just 7 years old. The house was a masterpiece, sitting on 5 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood, with marble floors imported from Italy, crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's annual salaries, and artwork that I later learned was worth more than entire city blocks. Richard had made his fortune creating some app that everyone uses, but no one really understands. He was always impeccably dressed, spoke in measured tones, and had this way of looking at people like he was calculating their worth down to the penny. Catherine was a former model, still stunningly beautiful at 38, with the kind of grace that comes from years of finishing school and etiquette classes. She moved through their mansion like she was floating, every gesture perfectly choreographed. The children were gorgeous too, Emma with her mother's blonde hair and sharp green eyes, Jacob with his father's dark features and serious expression, and little Sophie, a cherubic child who should have been full of laughter and mischief, but instead carried herself with an unnatural stillness that made my heart ache just looking at her dot. But on my very first night, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was past midnight when the crying started. Not just one child, but all 3 of them, sobbing desperately in their rooms. The sound echoed through the massive hallways like a haunted symphony of pain. These weren't normal tears. They were the kind of desperate, hopeless sobs that come from deep trauma, the kind that suggested these children had been crying for a very long time. I thought maybe they were having nightmares. But when I approached their doors to check, I heard Catherine's voice, sharp and threatening, hissing at them to be quiet or there would be consequences. The way she said consequences made my stomach turn. There was a coldness in her voice that no mother should ever use with her children, a tone that promised pain rather than comfort. The next morning, the children appeared at breakfast with red, swollen eyes, but the transformation was remarkable and disturbing. The moment their parents entered the dining room, they straightened up, plastered fake smiles on their faces, and began chattering about school and activities like nothing had happened. When I tried to offer comfort, they flinched away from me as if I were dangerous. Emma, the eldest, wouldn't even look at me directly. Jacob kept his head down, mechanically eating his expensive organic breakfast, while little Sophie sat perfectly still, like a porcelain doll afraid to move. What struck me most was how they seemed to be performing, even at breakfast. Every word seemed carefully chosen, every smile precisely timed. They thanked their parents for things that should have been basic: food, clothes, shelter, as if these were extraordinary gifts rather than fundamental rights. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What I discovered over the following weeks would change everything I thought I knew about this family, about wealth, about the darkness that can hide behind facades. Asterisk. Asterisk, the first clue came during my second week when I was cleaning the master bedroom. Richard was at his downtown office, and Catherine had gone to her yoga class at some exclusive studio that cost more per session than I used to make in a week. The house felt different when they were gone, less oppressive, like the walls themselves could finally breathe. I was changing the Egyptian cotton sheets when I noticed something odd tucked between the mattress and the handcrafted Italian headboard. A small recording device, no bigger than a coin, professional grade, the kind used by private investigators or worse. My hands trembled as I held it, wondering why anyone would need to record what happened in their own bedroom. Was Richard recording Catherine? Was Catherine recording Richard? Or was someone else monitoring them both? That's when I heard Emma's voice from the hallway, barely above a whisper, talking to her younger brother. Remember, Jacob, if anyone asks, we're happy. We love our parents. We're grateful for everything we have. We never cry. We never complain. We never tell anyone anything about what happens in this house. Her voice was mechanical, rehearsed, like she was reciting lines from a script she'd been forced to memorize thousands of times. The way she spoke made my skin crawl because no 12-year-old should sound so hollow, so defeated. She continued, "If you forget the rules, you know what happens. And next time, it won't just be you. Sophie will pay too." The threat in her young voice was chilling because it wasn't her threat. She was clearly repeating something she'd been told, passing down the fear that had been instilled in her. I quickly returned the device to its hiding place and continued my work, but my mind was racing. I'd worked for wealthy families before, and sure, they had their quirks and secrets, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. The children weren't just unhappy, they were terrified. And they were being systematically trained to hide that. Terror from the outside world. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention to the family dynamics. During meals, I noticed how the children's eyes would dart nervously to their parents before answering any question, no matter how simple. When Richard asked Emma about her grades, she paused for almost 3 seconds before responding, as if mentally checking her answer against some internal script. When Catherine complimented Jacob's haircut, he thanked her with such formal politeness that it sounded like he was addressing a stranger rather than his mother, but it was little Sophie who broke my heart the most. She was 7 years old, but she moved through the house like an old woman, careful and quiet, never running or playing or making the kind of joyful noise that should fill a home with children. I'd catch her sometimes, staring out the window with such profound sadness that I had to turn away. The children attended the most exclusive private school in the city, the kind where tuition costs more than most people's salaries. Every morning, a driver in a black luxury car would pick them up, and every afternoon he'd bring them home. But I started noticing that they never seemed excited about school, never talked about friends or activities or anything a normal child would be enthusiastic about. One afternoon, I was dusting the family photos in the living room when I realized something disturbing in every single picture. The children looked uncomfortable. Oh, they were smiling, but their smiles never reached their eyes. Their body language was stiff, formal, like they were posing with strangers rather than family. Even in the vacation photos from exotic locations, beaches in the Bahamas, ski, slopes in Switzerland, safaris in Africa, the children looked like they were enduring the experiences rather than enjoying them. That evening, as I was finishing my duties, I heard Richard and Catherine talking in hushed tones in the study. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the expensive but imperfect soundproofing. Richard was saying something about maintaining the image and ensuring compliance. Catherine responded with something about increasing the pressure and making sure they understand the stakes. The words sent chills down my spine, but I still didn't understand the full scope of what was happening in that house. I thought maybe they were just controlling parents, the kind who micromanage their children's lives to ensure success and status. But I was about to discover something far more sinister. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening when little Sophie had what I can only describe as a complete breakdown. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard screaming from upstairs, not the angry screaming of a tantrum, but the desperate primal screaming of a child in genuine distress. By the time I reached the second floor, Emma and Jacob were already there, trying to calm their sister down. But Sophie was beyond comfort. She was in her bedroom, curled up in the corner behind her designer dollhouse, shaking uncontrollably and repeating the same words over and over. I can't do it anymore. I can't pretend anymore. I just want to be a normal little girl. The anguish in her voice was heartbreaking. But what shocked me more was the terror on Emma and Jacob's faces, not concern for their sister, but fear of what would happen when their parents found out. Emma was frantically trying to quiet Sophie, whispering urgent instructions. You have to stop crying, Sophie. You know the rules. If they hear you, it will be worse for all of us. Please, just breathe and remember what we practiced. She was only 12 years old, but she was managing this crisis with the skill of someone who had done it many times before. That's when I heard the front door slam. Catherine was home from her charity luncheon. The children heard it too, and the change in their demeanor was immediate and terrifying. Emma grabbed Sophie and started wiping her tears with rough efficiency. Jacob ran to the window to check if their father's car was in the driveway. The panic in their movements told me everything I needed to know. Their parents weren't just strict. They were something much worse. I made a split-second decision that would change everything. Instead of leaving the children to handle this alone, I scooped Sophie up in my arms and carried her to my small room in the servants' quarters. It was the only place in the house without cameras. I'd noticed them everywhere else, hidden but definitely present, recording everything that happened in the family's perfect life. Sophie clung to me like I was her lifeline, her small body, still shaking with sobs. In broken whispers, she began to tell me things that made my blood run cold. She told me about the training sessions that happened in the basement, where they were taught how to smile convincingly when they were in pain. She told me about the punishments for showing emotion, for acting like normal children, for being anything less than the perfect, grateful, well-behaved accessories their parents needed them to be. But what she told me next made me realize I wasn't just witnessing child abuse. I was seeing something far more calculated and sinister. They're going to sell us, she whispered, her 7-year-old voice carrying a weight no child should ever have to bear. Not like slaves, but like we're advertisements for other people who want perfect children. Daddy said we're too valuable to keep, and that other rich families will pay lots of money to have children who are already trained to be good. My hands were shaking as I held her. This wasn't just about controlling their children. This was about commodifying them, turning them into products to be sold to other wealthy families who wanted the appearance of perfect family life without the inconvenience of actually raising children with love and patience. Emma appeared in my doorway, her face pale with fear. Maria, you can't be here with Sophie. If they find out, double quote, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The threat was clear. But then she did something that surprised me. She stepped into my room and closed the door behind her. I need to tell someone, she said, her voice barely audible. I can't protect Jacob and Sophie much longer. They're getting worse, and they're planning something big. There are people coming to the house next week. Potential buyers, I think. They're going to make us perform, show how well trained we are. Us. She spoke, I realized that Emma had been carrying the burden of protecting her siblings for far too long. She was 12 years old, but she had been forced to become their guardian, their shield against their own parents' cruelty. The weight of that responsibility was crushing her, and I could see that she was barely holding on. That night, after I'd helped the children return to their rooms and pretend that nothing had happened, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, trying to process what I'd learned. These weren't just neglected or emotionally abused children. They were being systematically broken down and rebuilt as commodities for other wealthy families who shared Richard and Catherine's twisted values. But what could I do? I'd signed those legal documents that basically gave the Whitmores the power to destroy my life if I spoke out. I had no real evidence except the word of traumatized children. And even if I went to the authorities, would they believe a maid over a millionaire family with perfect public reputations? The next morning would bring new horrors, and I would be forced to make a choice that would either save these children or destroy us all. Asterisk, asterisk. The next morning, I woke up to find that Sophie had wet her bed, something that hadn't happened in months according to Emma. But instead of handling it quietly, Catherine decided to make it a teaching moment. I watched in horror as she forced Sophie to stand in the bathroom wearing her soiled pajamas while she lectured her about maintaining standards and controlling bodily functions like a civilized person. Sophie, 7 years old and already traumatized from the previous night's breakdown, stood there shaking while her mother berated her with a kind of cold, clinical detachment usually reserved for training animals. "You will wear these pajamas to breakfast," Catherine announced, "and you will thank me for the lesson in consequences. Perhaps the humiliation will help you remember to control yourself in the future." I wanted to intervene, to wrap that little girl in a clean towel and tell her that accidents happen and it's okay, but I caught Emma's eye from the hallway. She gave me the slightest shake of her head, a warning. She knew what I didn't yet understand. Any interference from me would make things exponentially worse for all of them. At breakfast, Sophie sat at the polished dining table in her stained pajamas, mechanically eating her organic oatmeal while tears silently rolled down her cheeks. Richard didn't even acknowledge what was happening, just scrolled through his phone and occasionally made comments about stock prices and business meetings. Emma and Jacob ate in silence, but I could see the tension in their shoulders, the way they kept glancing at their sister with helpless pain in their eyes. That's when Catherine made an announcement that froze my blood. "Children, next weekend, we're having some very important guests. The Morrison family from Boston will be visiting, along with their business associates. You know what's expected of you. Perfect behavior, perfect manners, perfect gratitude. This is a crucial opportunity for our family, and I won't tolerate any disappointments." The way she said disappointments made it clear that failure wasn't an option. Emma's fork clattered against her plate, and Jacob's face went completely pale. Even Richard looked up from his phone, giving his children a look that promised severe consequences if they didn't perform to expectations. After breakfast, while Catherine was on a conference call with her interior designer about arrangements for the weekend guests, I followed Emma to her room. She was sitting at her desk, staring at homework she clearly couldn't concentrate on, when I gently closed the door behind me. "Emma," I whispered, "what happens next weekend? What do they want you to do for these guests?" She looked up at me with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a 12-year-old. "It's like an audition," she said quietly. "We have to prove how well-trained we are, how perfectly we can behave, how grateful and happy we can appear. The Morrisons are thinking about acquiring us, but there will be other potential families there too. It's like a bidding situation." Asterisk, my heart was pounding as the full horror of the situation became clear. These people were literally selling their children to other wealthy families. treating their own flesh and blood like luxury commodities to be traded among the elite. Emma, how long has this been going on? Since I was 10, she replied with devastating matter-of-factness. They've been training us, breaking us down, rebuilding us to be perfect little robots. They've had other interested families visit before, but none of them were willing to pay what Mom and Dad wanted. The Morrisons are different. They have connections to international buyers. If we don't get selected next weekend, they're threatening to send us to some facility overseas where they train children for even worse situations. Asterisk, the room was spinning. I felt sick to my stomach as the full scope of their plan became clear. This wasn't just about selling their children to other American families. There was an international network involved, potentially trafficking these children to buyers around the world. There's more, Emma continued, her voice getting even quieter. They've been documenting everything. All the training sessions, all the punishments, all the ways they've broken us down and built us back up. They have hours of video footage showing how obedient and controllable we are. It's like a portfolio they show to potential buyers. That explained the recording device I'd found in the master bedroom, and probably meant there were cameras and recording equipment throughout the house that I hadn't even noticed. Every moment of these children's suffering had been captured and cataloged as selling points for their future buyers. I looked at this brave little girl who had been forced to grow up far too fast, who had been protecting her siblings while enduring unimaginable psychological torture, and I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. Emma, what if I told you there might be a way out? What if I could help you and Jacob and Sophie escape all of this? For the first time since I'd known her, Emma's carefully controlled expression cracked, and I saw a glimmer of hope flash across her face, but it was quickly replaced by fear. Maria, you don't understand. They have connections everywhere. Police, judges, social services, they have people in their pockets. And even if we could somehow get away, they would find us. They would destroy you for helping us, and they would make sure we suffered in ways that would make what we're going through now seem like paradise. But I had already made up my mind. I couldn't stand by and watch these children be sold to the highest bidder, asterisk, that afternoon, while the children were at their exclusive private school and the Whitmores were at their respective business meetings. I did something that could have gotten me killed. I went exploring. I needed evidence, real proof of what was happening in this house, something more substantial than the testimony of traumatized children. The basement was where I found it, hidden behind a false wall that I discovered purely by accident when I was checking for the source of a strange electrical humming sound. There was a room that made my blood run cold. It looked like a cross between a recording studio and a torture chamber. Professional lighting equipment, multiple cameras, a one-way mirror, and furniture that was clearly designed to restrain rather than comfort. But it was the filing cabinets that contained the real horror. Dozens of folders, each labeled with the children's names and ages, containing detailed documentation of their training progress. Photos showing the children in various states of distress, psychological evaluation reports written by someone with a PhD in child psychology, and most disturbing of all, price lists and buyer profiles. I learned that Richard and Catherine weren't just selling their own children, they were running a larger operation. There were files on at least a dozen other children, some as young as 4, all being prepared for sale to wealthy families around the world. The operation had been running for over 5 years, generating millions of dollars in revenue. Buyer profiles were even more disturbing. Wealthy families from Europe, Asia, and South America who wanted children that were already properly trained, meaning broken, compliant, and conditioned to accept abuse as normal. Some buyers specifically requested children who had been traumatized in particular ways. as if they were ordering from a menu of human suffering. But the most shocking discovery was a video file on Richard's computer labeled Sample Product Demonstration. I almost couldn't bring myself to watch it, but I knew I needed to understand the full scope of what these children were enduring. The footage showed Emma, Jacob, and Sophie in this very basement room, being subjected to various tests to demonstrate their obedience and compliance. I watched 12-year-old Emma smile and thank her parents while they subjected her to psychological torture, testing how long she could maintain her composure under increasingly stressful conditions. I saw 10-year-old Jacob perform complex etiquette routines while being verbally abused, never losing his perfect posture or polite demeanor. And I witnessed 7-year-old Sophie enduring physical discomfort while expressing gratitude for the learning experience. The video was clearly meant to show potential buyers what they would be purchasing children so thoroughly broken and reconditioned that they would smile while being abused, thank their abusers for the privilege, and never, ever fight back or try to escape. I was physically sick by the time I finished watching, but I forced myself to copy the files onto a flash drive I'd brought with me. This was evidence that could bring down not just the Whitmores, but potentially an entire network of child traffickers masquerading as wealthy families making private adoptions. That evening, when the children returned from school, I noticed something different about them. They seemed more alert, more aware of my presence, like they were trying to communicate something without words. During dinner, Emma kept catching my eye and giving me meaningful looks, while Jacob seemed to be positioning himself to shield Sophie from their parents' view. After dinner, as I was cleaning the kitchen, little Sophie appeared beside me like a ghost. "Maria," she whispered, "Emma says you might be able to help us. Is that true?" Before I could answer, Catherine's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Sophie, what are you doing in the kitchen? You know you're not allowed to bother the help with your silly chatter." Sophie immediately straightened up and plastered that horrible fake smile on her face. "I'm sorry, Mother. I was just thanking Maria for preparing such a delicious dinner." The words came out like a rehearsed script, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Catherine studied her daughter with cold calculation, then turned to me. "Maria, I trust you understand that the children are not to engage in casual conversation with the staff. They have important preparations to focus on for this weekend's guests, and any distractions could compromise their performance." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "I understand completely." But Catherine wasn't finished. She moved closer to me, and I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something else, something cold and predatory. "I hope you understand, Maria, that discretion is not just expected in this position, it's absolutely essential. There are aspects of our family life that outsiders might misunderstand. People who don't appreciate the level of discipline and training required to raise truly exceptional children." The threat was clear. She knew that I was becoming aware of what was happening, and she was warning me to keep my mouth shut or face consequences. But she had no idea that I had already seen too much, learned too much, and was already planning to bring her entire sick operation crashing down. That night, I lay in my small room, staring at the flash drive that contained enough evidence to put both Richard and Catherine in prison for the rest of their lives. But I also knew that going to the authorities wasn't enough. I needed to make sure the children would be safe, and that meant getting them away from this house before the weekend auction could take place. I was about to embark on the most dangerous mission of my life, asterisk. The next morning brought a development that accelerated everything. Richard announced that the weekend schedule had changed. The viewing would now take place tomorrow night, Friday, instead of Saturday. He claimed it was due to scheduling conflicts with the prospective buyers, but I could see the real reason in the children's faces. Someone was getting suspicious. and they needed to move quickly. Emma found me in the laundry room that afternoon, her usual composure cracking around the edges. "They're panicking about something," she whispered while pretending to help me fold sheets. "Dad was on the phone all morning with someone, and Mom has been making lists and burning papers in the fireplace. I think someone might be investigating." Then my heart raced. Had someone else discovered their operation? Was there already an investigation in progress? If so, that meant time was running out even faster than I'd thought. "Emma, I need you to listen carefully. I found evidence of what they're doing, not just to you three, but to other children too. I'm going to get help, but first I need to get you, Jacob, and Sophie out of this house." Asterisk, her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and terror. "Maria, you don't understand what you're up against. They have people everywhere. Last year, a social worker started asking questions about a family they'd sold children to. That social worker disappeared, and her investigation was mysteriously closed. Before I could respond, we heard footsteps in the hallway. Emma immediately transformed back into her perfect, compliant persona, continuing to fold laundry as if we'd been discussing nothing more important than fabric softener. But I could see her hands shaking. Asterisk, that evening, during what the family called their preparation session, I witnessed something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was supposed to be cleaning the upper floors, but I could hear everything happening in the basement through the house's heating vents. Richard and Catherine were conducting what they called a final rehearsal with the children. I heard them subjecting Emma, Jacob, and Sophie to increasingly disturbing scenarios, testing their ability to maintain their trained responses under extreme stress. They were being evaluated on their ability to smile convincingly while in pain, to express gratitude for mistreatment, and to perform various tasks that were clearly designed to demonstrate their complete psychological submission. The most heartbreaking part was hearing little Sophie's voice, still trying to sound cheerful and grateful, while her parents subjected her to psychological torture that would break most adults. At one point, I heard Richard telling her that if she didn't perform perfectly tomorrow night, her siblings would pay the price for her failure. "Remember, Sophie?" Catherine's voice drifted up through the vents. "You're not just representing yourself tomorrow. You're representing the quality of our training program. The families who are coming have paid a great deal of money just for the opportunity to evaluate you. If you disappoint them, it reflects poorly on everything we've invested in you." I had to bite my hand to keep from screaming. They were talking about their 7-year-old daughter like she was a product being prepared for market, not a human being who deserved love and protection. That night, I made a decision that would either save these children or get us all killed. I couldn't wait for outside help. I had to act immediately. Using the house's complex intercom system that I'd learned to operate as part of my duties, I sent a message to each of the children's rooms after their parents had gone to sleep. Message was simple: pack only what you can carry in a small bag. Meet me in the garden shed at 3 a.m. Trust me. At exactly 3 a.m., I crept out to the garden shed behind the pool house. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the entire property. One by one, the children appeared, like shadows in the darkness, each carrying a small backpack. Emma came first, moving with the careful silence of someone who had learned to be invisible. Jacob followed, his young face set with determination that reminded me heartbreakingly of a soldier heading into battle. Finally, little Sophie emerged from the house, clutching a stuffed animal that looked like it had been her comfort through countless nights of terror. "Where are we going?" Emma whispered. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to tell them would either give them hope or terrify them beyond measure. "We're going to my sister's house across town. She's a nurse, and she has connections with people who can help us." But first, we need to make sure your parents can't track us or hurt anyone who tries to help. What I didn't tell them was that I had also sent copies of all the evidence I gathered to 3 different news organizations, the FBI, and an international task force that specialized in child trafficking cases. I had created multiple insurance policies to ensure that even if something happened to us, the truth about their operation would still come to light. But first, we had to survive the next few hours. Because once Richard and Catherine discovered their children were missing, they would use every resource at their disposal to find us and silence us permanently. As we prepared to leave the property. That had been their prison for so many years. Sophie tugged on my sleeve. "Maria," she whispered, "what if they catch us?" I knelt down to her level and looked into her eyes that held far too much pain for a 7-year-old. "Then at least we'll have tried to be free," I told her. And sometimes trying to be free is the most important thing you can do, even if it's scary. We were about to find out just how scary it could be. Getting off the Whitmore property was easier than I'd expected. The security system was designed to keep people out, not to trap people inside. But as we walked through the darkened streets of the exclusive neighborhood, every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every distant car engine made us freeze in terror. Sophie was struggling to keep up despite her determination, so I carried her while Emma and Jacob flanked us like bodyguards. These children had been through hell, but they were also survivors, and their courage in that moment was both inspiring and heartbreaking. We were about halfway to my sister Rosa's house when Emma suddenly grabbed my arm. "There's a car following." She whispered. "Black sedan, 2 blocks back." "It's been behind us since we left the neighborhood." My blood turned to ice. I looked back and saw the vehicle she was talking about, moving slowly, keeping pace with us, headlights off. They had discovered the children were missing faster than I'd hoped, and now we were being hunted. "This way," I hissed, leading them down an alley between 2 apartment buildings. We crouched behind a dumpster, all 4 of us barely breathing as the sedan crept past the alley entrance. Through the darkness, I could see the silhouette of the driver scanning the area with what looked like night vision equipment. Jacob was shaking so hard his teeth were chattering, but he was trying to be brave for his little sister. Emma had her arms around Sophie, whispering reassurances that we were going to be okay. Even though I could see the terror in her own eyes, we waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before the car moved on. But I knew we couldn't stay hidden forever, and we couldn't risk leading these people to my sister's house where they might hurt her too. "Change of plans," I whispered. "We're going to the police station." Emma's grip on my arm tightened. "Maria, no. I told you, they have people in the police. If we go there, they'll just hand us back to my parents and make sure we disappear forever." She was right, but I was running out of options. Then I remembered something Rosa had told me about her work at the hospital. They had security protocols for domestic violence victims and trafficked persons, ways to bypass potentially compromised law enforcement and connect directly with federal authorities. "The hospital," I said. "We're going to the emergency room at City General. My sister Rosa works there, and they have special procedures for situations like this." We emerged from the alley and began making our way through the sleeping city, using side streets and staying in the shadows. Sophie had fallen asleep in my arms, exhausted from fear and the late hour, but Emma and Jacob remained alert, constantly checking behind us for signs of pursuit. 20 minutes later, we saw the lights of the hospital emergency room ahead of us, but as we approached the entrance, Emma suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. "That's Dr. Morrison," she whispered, pointing to a tall man in an expensive suit talking to someone near the hospital entrance. "He's one of the buyers coming tomorrow night. If he sees us, double quotes." My heart sank. The corruption went even deeper than I'd imagined. Some of the people who were supposed to protect children were actually part of the network buying and selling them. We couldn't trust anyone in positions of authority. But then I saw Rosa through the emergency room windows, checking on a patient. My sister, who had dedicated her life to healing people, who had always been my moral compass, who would fight heaven and hell to protect innocent children. I made a decision that required everything I had left in terms of courage. Emma, take Jacob and Sophie around to the back entrance near the loading dock. Wait for me there. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, or if anyone tries to approach you, run. Just run and don't look back. Before she could protest, I walked straight toward the main entrance, passing within feet of Dr. Morrison. If he was part of this network, then he probably knew who I was by now. But sometimes the best way to hide is in plain sight. I walked into the emergency room like I belonged there, like I was just another family member visiting a patient. Rosa looked up from her charts, and her face immediately registered concern. When she saw me, "Maria, what are you doing here? You look terrible." I moved close to her and spoke in rapid Spanish, our childhood language that had always been our secret code. "Rosa, I need your help. There are children in danger, and I have evidence of trafficking, but the police might be compromised. Do you still have those contacts with the federal task force?" Rosa's expression shifted from concern to fierce determination. She had seen enough victims of trafficking and abuse come through her emergency room to recognize the signs immediately. "How many children?" she asked. 3, and they're waiting outside. Rosa, these people have money, connections, influence. They'll try to discredit me, maybe even you. But I have evidence that could bring down an entire network. Without hesitation, Rosa grabbed a secure phone from the nurse's station and made a call. Within minutes, she had connected with Agent Sarah Chun from the FBI's Child Trafficking Task Force, bypassing local law enforcement entirely. "Agent Chun is 20 minutes away," Rosa told me. "But Maria, if these people are as connected as you say, they'll be watching the hospital. We need to get those children somewhere safe until the federal agents arrive." That's when I looked out the window and saw something that made my blood freeze. Richard Whitmore himself was walking across the hospital parking lot, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Somehow they had tracked us here. The final confrontation was about to begin. I ran toward the loading dock where I'd left the children, my heart pounding with terror at what Richard might do if he found them. But when I rounded the corner, I found Emma, Jacob, and Sophie huddled together behind a medical supply truck. And they weren't alone. Rosa was with them, along with 2 hospital security guards who had positioned themselves as a protective barrier. "They're here," I gasped. "Richard and some other men. They're coming." Rosa's face hardened with the kind of determination I'd seen when she fought to save dying patients. "The FBI agent is still 15 minutes away, but I've called hospital administration. This is hospital property, and we have protocols for protecting vulnerable patients and their families." But even as she spoke, we could hear voices approaching from around the building. Richard's voice, smooth and authoritative, was talking to someone in calm, measured tones. "I'm simply looking for my children and our domestic employee. There seems to have been some kind of misunderstanding, possibly a mental health episode. We just want to get everyone home safely." The way he said it made my skin crawl. Even now, facing exposure, he was still manipulating the situation, making it sound like I was the unstable one, like the children had been influenced by someone with psychological problems. Emma pressed closer to me, her young body trembling. "He's going to convince them," she whispered. "He always does. He has this way of making people believe that he's the victim, that we're the problem." But then something happened that changed everything. Little Sophie, who had been silent and terrified throughout our entire escape, suddenly stood up from behind the truck. At 7 years old, this tiny girl who had been broken and rebuilt by years of systematic abuse found a courage that even adults rarely possess. "No more," she said, her small voice carrying across the loading dock with surprising strength. "I'm not going back to that house. I'm not going to smile while they hurt me anymore. I'm not going to pretend to be grateful for being sold like a toy." Her words cut through the darkness like a blade of truth. One of the hospital security guards, a large man with kind eyes who had children of his own, stepped forward protectively. "Ma'am," he called out toward the approaching voices, "this is hospital property. If you need to speak with these individuals, you'll need to go through proper channels." Richard appeared around the corner of the building, looking exactly as he always did, impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, every inch the successful businessman and loving father. Behind him were the two men in suits, and I now recognized one of them as the private investigator the Whitmores kept on retainer for security purposes. "Thank goodness," Richard said, his voice full of apparent relief. "There you are, children. We've been so worried." He looked at the security guards with the kind of respectful authority that money and status provide. "I'm Richard Whitmore. These are my children, and this is our domestic employee, Maria. I'm afraid she's been struggling with some mental health issues lately, and she seems to have influenced my children to leave our home in the middle of the night. It was masterfully done." He looked like the concerned father, I looked like the unstable employee, and the children looked like confused victims caught in the middle. But Sophie stepped forward again, this time with Emma and Jacob flanking her. "He's lying," Sophie said, her young voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "We're not his children anymore. We're his products. He was going to sell us tomorrow night to people who wanted to hurt us even more." The security guards exchanged glances. They had dealt with domestic disputes before, but there was something about Sophie's words, something about the way all three children were positioning themselves away from their father, that set off alarm bells. Richard's perfect composure flickered for just a moment, so briefly that most people would have missed it, but I saw the flash of cold rage cross his features before he regained control. "Sophie, sweetheart, you shouldn't tell stories like that. We talked about this. Sometimes when children are stressed or tired, they can get confused about reality." But Jacob stepped forward now, his 10-year-old voice shaking but determined. "Stop calling us sweetheart. Stop pretending to love us. We have recordings of what you do to us in the basement. We have proof of the people who come to look at us like we're animals at an auction." That's when I realized that these incredible children had been planning their own escape, gathering their own evidence, waiting for the right moment to find someone who would believe them. They hadn't just been passive victims. They had been documenting their abuse, preparing for this moment when they would finally have the chance to speak their truth. Richard's mask was starting to slip more noticeably now. "I think everyone needs to calm down," he said, but there was a hardness in his voice that hadn't been there before. "These children have been influenced by conspiracy theories and inappropriate content. They need professional help, not encouragement for their fantasies." That's when Rosa stepped forward, and I saw my sister transform into the fierce advocate she had always been for the vulnerable patients she treated. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen too much. "Suffering to be easily fooled, these children are exhibiting classic signs of systematic abuse and trafficking. As a mandatory reporter and a healthcare professional, I'm obligated to ensure their safety until proper authorities can investigate their claims." The tension in the loading dock was reaching a breaking point. Richard's two companions were shifting restlessly, clearly calculating whether they could simply take the children by force. The hospital security guards were outnumbered but determined to protect what they increasingly recognized as abuse victims. And then, cutting through the night air like a beacon of hope, we heard the sound of multiple vehicles approaching at high speed. Their engines growing louder as they entered the hospital parking lot. Agent Sarah Chun and the federal task force had arrived. Asterisk, asterisk. The arrival of the FBI vehicles changed everything in an instant. Agent Sarah Chun emerged from the lead car with a team of federal agents, all wearing tactical gear that made it clear this wasn't just a routine investigation. They had come prepared for the possibility of armed resistance, which told me that my evidence had been taken very seriously. Richard's demeanor shifted dramatically when he saw the federal agents approaching. The mask of concerned father slipped away entirely, replaced by the cold, calculating businessman who had built his fortune on the suffering of children. "This is a private family matter," he said, his voice sharp with authority. "I don't know what lies this woman has been spreading, but Mr. Richard Whitmore," Agent Chun interrupted, her voice cutting through his protest like steel. "I'm Agent Sarah Chun with the FBI's Child Trafficking Task Force. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of child trafficking, conspiracy to commit human trafficking, and operating a criminal enterprise involving the exploitation of minors." The look on Richard's face was one I'll never forget. Surprise, rage, and calculation all warring for control. Behind him, his two companions were already backing away, clearly unwilling to face federal charges for whatever role they played in his operation. But it was the children's reactions that truly broke my heart. Emma, Jacob, and Sophie didn't look relieved or happy. They looked terrified. Years of systematic abuse had conditioned them to expect that any challenge to their parents' authority would result in even worse punishment later. They couldn't quite believe that this nightmare might actually be ending. Agent Chun approached the children with the kind of gentle professionalism that told me she had extensive experience with trafficking victims. "Emma, Jacob, Sophie," she said, kneeling down to their eye level, "my name is Sarah, and I'm here to make sure you're safe. You don't have to go back to that house, and you don't have to be afraid anymore." Little Sophie was the first to break. She ran to Agent Chun and collapsed into her arms, years of suppressed terror and pain finally finding release in desperate sobs. "They were going to sell us tomorrow," she cried. "There were people coming to buy us, and we had to practice being perfect so they would want us." Asterisk Agent Chun held Sophie while signaling to her team. Within minutes, additional vehicles arrived. Social workers, child psychologists, and medical personnel trained specifically in dealing with trafficking victims. The entire loading dock had become a command center for the most important rescue operation of my life. Richard was being read his rights, but even in handcuffs, he was still trying to manipulate the situation. "This is all a misunderstanding," he kept repeating. "These people have no idea what they're dealing with. My lawyers will have this sorted out within hours." But Agent Chun had more surprises. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, approaching him with a thick folder, "we've been investigating your operation for 6 months. We have financial records showing payments from buyers in 12 different countries. We have recordings from your basement. We have testimony from other children who were trafficked through your network. And we have documentation proving that you and your wife have been operating this criminal enterprise for over 5 years. The color drained from Richard's face as he realized the scope of what they knew. This wasn't just about his own children. The entire network was being exposed. "Where's Catherine Whitmore?" Agent Chun continued. "We have warrants for her arrest as well." That's when one of Richard's associates, the private investigator, made a decision that probably saved his own life. "She's at the house," he said quickly, "but she's not alone." There are 3 buyers there who flew in early for tomorrow's auction. If you move fast, you can get them all. Within minutes, half of Agent Chen's team was speeding toward the Whitmore mansion, while the other half secured the area around the hospital. Richard and his remaining associate were loaded into federal vehicles, still protesting their innocence, even as the evidence mounted against them. But the most important moment came when Agent Chen sat down with Emma, Jacob, and Sophie to explain what would happen next. "You're going to stay in a safe place while we investigate everything," she told them. "There will be doctors and counselors to help you process what you've been through. And most importantly, you will never ever have to go back to that house or see those people again unless you choose to testify against them in court." Emma, who had been the strong one for so long, finally allowed herself to cry. "Is it really over?" she asked. "Are we really free?" Rosa knelt beside the children, her nurse's instincts taking over as she checked them for signs of immediate medical needs. "You're free," she told them. "And my sister Maria risked everything to make sure you got this chance." VA's the children were being prepared for transport to a secure facility where they could begin the long process of healing. Agent Chen pulled me aside. "Maria," she said, "what you did tonight saved not just these 3 children, but potentially dozens of others. The evidence you gathered has given us leads into an international trafficking network that we've been trying to crack for years." I looked back at Emma, Jacob, and Sophie, who were finally safe after years of unimaginable suffering. They were traumatized, scared, and facing a long road to recovery, but they were alive, they were free, and they would never again have to smile while being hurt. But even as we celebrated this victory, I knew that Richard had been right about one thing. His connections ran deep, and there would be people who would want revenge for the network that had been exposed to my asterisk. The raid on the Whitmore mansion happened simultaneously with our confrontation at the hospital, and the results were even more devastating than Agent Chen had hoped. Catherine Whitmore was arrested along with 3 international buyers who had flown in early for what they thought would be a private auction of premium products. But the most shocking discovery came when agents searched the house more thoroughly. Hidden behind that false wall in the basement, they found not just the evidence I had seen, but a complete database containing information on over 200 children who had been trafficked through the Whitmore network over the past 5 years. Some of these children had been sold to buyers in Europe and Asia. Others had been placed with wealthy American families who wanted the appearance of adoption without the inconvenience of legal processes or background checks. And some, the ones who proved too difficult to break or train, had simply disappeared entirely. The scope of the operation was staggering. Richard and Catherine hadn't just been selling their own children. They had been running a sophisticated international trafficking ring that catered to the ultra-wealthy. They had connections with corrupt adoption agencies, private schools that served as fronts for acquiring vulnerable children, and even legitimate charities that they used to identify potential victims. Agent Chen briefed me on these discoveries 3 days after the arrests, as Emma, Jacob, and Sophie were beginning their recovery process at a secure facility designed specifically for trafficking survivors. "Maria," she said, "your evidence was the key that unlocked everything. But I need you to understand that this case is going to generate enormous attention, and there are still people connected to this network who are free." She was warning me that my life was in danger. Already, there had been attempts to discredit me in the media, stories planted by expensive public relations firms, claiming that I was a disgruntled employee with mental health issues who had manipulated traumatized children into making false accusations, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showed millions of dollars in payments from buyers. Video footage documented years of systematic abuse. Medical records revealed the psychological and physical trauma inflicted on the children. And most damning of all, other survivors were coming forward, children who had been trafficked through the network years earlier and had been too afraid to speak until now. The trial preparation was intensive and exhausting. I spent weeks being interviewed by federal prosecutors, going over every detail of what I had witnessed and documented. Emma, Jacob, and Sophie were also being prepared to testify, though their recovery was the priority and their participation would be entirely voluntary. Emma surprised everyone with her determination to face her parents in court. "I want to tell the truth," she said during one of our visits. "I want other people to know what really happened, so maybe other children won't have to go through what we did." At 11 years old, she had missed her 12th birthday while in protective custody. Emma was showing a strength and maturity that was both inspiring and heartbreaking. She understood that her testimony could help convict not just her parents, but the entire network of buyers and facilitators who had profited from her suffering. Jacob was more hesitant about testifying, which was completely understandable. At 10, he was still processing the trauma of what had been done to him, and the idea of facing his abusers in a courtroom was terrifying. The prosecutors made it clear that he wouldn't be forced to testify if he wasn't ready. Little Sophie was making the most remarkable progress. Away from the constant fear and manipulation, her natural 7-year-old personality was beginning to emerge. She was laughing again, playing with toys, even making friends with other children at the recovery facility. But she still had nightmares, and she still flinched when adults raised their voices or moved too quickly. The media attention was overwhelming. The story of the millionaire couple who had been trafficking their own children captivated the public, but it also brought unwanted scrutiny to all of us. Reporters camped outside the recovery facility, trying to get photos of the children. News programs ran specials about child trafficking among the wealthy elite. Some of the coverage was sympathetic and helped raise awareness about the issue. But other coverage was sensationalized and exploitative, treating the children's suffering as entertainment. I had to get a restraining order against 3 different tabloid publications that were offering money for exclusive interviews with the children. The most difficult part was watching Emma, Jacob, and Sophie struggle with the realization that their entire lives had been a lie. They were learning to trust adults who genuinely cared about their well-being, but years of systematic betrayal couldn't be undone overnight. During one of my visits, Sophie asked me a question that broke my heart. "Maria, why didn't other grown-ups help us before? Didn't anyone else know we were sad?" The truth was that there had been signs. Teachers who noticed behavioral changes, neighbors who heard crying, even relatives who suspected something was wrong. But the Whitmores' wealth and status had protected them. People were reluctant to question a successful family, especially when that family had lawyers and connections who could make problems disappear. The children's recovery was going to be a lifelong process, but they were getting the help they needed. Trauma specialists, child psychologists, and support groups were all part of their new reality. They were learning that they had value beyond their ability to please adults, that their feelings mattered, and that they deserved love and protection. But even as we prepared for the trial that would hopefully deliver justice, I knew that the hardest part was still ahead of us.